Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first story is titled, Don't Mess with the Lady Using a Walker. My mom was handicapped due to a stroke and she had to use a walker to get anywhere. Her and my dad loved this local seafood restaurant. It was their favorite place to go for dinner. It was really a popular restaurant and always crowded. It had a long line to get in. We get to the restaurant and my dad drops us off near the front and he goes to park. The line was long as usual to get in. My mom and I waited for what seemed like forever to get to the hostess stand. My dad had come in at this point and my poor mom had to stand up the entire time because they had no seats to sit and wait. We finally got to the front of the line and this guy pushes his way to the front and starts yelling that he needs to make a reservation. That the last time he was there, they had screwed up his reservation. Meanwhile, we had waited in this line and finally made it. My poor mom standing up the whole time and this guy just takes over. The hostess doesn't say one word to us. She just lets him take over and takes his reservation info for 9 people for the end of the week. She never said I'm sorry for the wait or told him he had to wait his turn. Nothing. I was so pissed. My parents didn't go out a lot. They would look forward to going to this restaurant so much when they were able to go. It was difficult for my mom to get around with a walker. They usually would wait until one of us could go with them to assist my mom. The guy was so rude, so obnoxious, and so entitled. I was livid, so the next day I called the restaurant and canceled his reservation. I remembered everything he said and I pretended to be his wife. Lesson to be learned. Don't mess with my mom. God rest her soul. She didn't have many opportunities to enjoy life after her stroke, and that guy messed with her. My only regret is that I couldn't go back the night of the reservation to see his reaction. The next story is titled, Just Be a Set of Fingers, Okay? I was a legal secretary at a small law firm. Due to the nature of the firm's business, they seldom appeared in court and mainly fought through court documents. So very strong emphasis was placed on error-free, perfect documents. Secretaries were held accountable. One staff attorney, R, just couldn't keep a secretary for more than a few weeks. Eventually, out of desperation, the executive director asked me to work with R to figure out what to look for in hiring his future secretary. He didn't use a computer, so he handwrote documents while other attorneys created computer drafts. Secretaries were responsible for typing, inputting revisions, fixing minor errors, and ensuring that court rules were followed for all documents. So I did. He was enraged, stating how dare I change his documents. So I did. He was enraged, stating how dare I change his documents. I pointed out I made small corrections, fixing spelling and grammar errors, etc. I was careful to never change something that was context or legal, and would simply note those for his review. But he just insisted he always wrote exactly what he wanted. I said, so, you just want a pair of fingers, no brain? He stated emphatically, yes. So I did exactly that. Didn't correct spelling of client's name, didn't correct defendant to plaintiff, didn't correct or even flag anything. It was incredibly hard for me as I had spent years proofreading and correcting as I typed, and my higher than average salary reflected that. But he got 10 fingers no more. It only took one 45-plus page document for him to come say he changed his mind, and he also wanted a brain. I think because I was willing to obsessively and obviously pettily comply with his original request, he woke up a smidge. We had other run-ins, but eventually reached a mutual semi-respect, me for his dedication to good causes, and him for sincerely wanting to ease his workload. The next story is titled, Mom Steals Keys to My House and Moves In. Calls 911 when I kick her out. Today I want to tell you a story that I find interesting and maybe even outrageous a little. I'm married to an exceptional woman, and my life couldn't be better. But a little time ago, I must eliminate my mom out of the story. She was the type of mother I would never want for my child. She always reminded me that I'm not good enough for her, and that I never was. She always acted like crap around and with my wife, which was also very annoying. But I tried not to say too much, as my wife values child-parents relationships a lot. I also have a younger brother who is absolutely a mess. He's 24 and he still lives with our parents, but my mother always loved him more, so that's fine for her. I told my wife many stories from our childhood, and she told me that anyone could clearly realize that my younger brother was the favorite child of the family. My mom never asked my younger brother to do anything around the house, as I was always the one to do them. With all of this, I still tried to be the best son that I ever could be. I always invited my mother to our apartment, where she always told us that we were poor and we were going to die in that apartment and never improve our miserable life. My wife always bought her gifts and so on. She tried making things right for both of us, but it never worked, as my mother was selfish and mean. After almost 4 years of living in a small apartment, we finally had enough money to buy our first house. Our dream was finally a reality. We bought a house together. The house was in an area that we both loved a lot, and the house was just amazing. It had a big yard, a small pool, and a place for barbecue. The house was big, nothing huge, but we loved it. "I can't believe we did this," said my wife on our first night in our new house. "It's amazing," I replied, stunned by everything. As soon as we moved, my mother started rambling about things she didn't like about the house. She didn't like the area, the house colors, and structure, but the thing she hated most about the house was probably me. She told me that we didn't deserve the house and that the apartment fitted us better. "That apartment you had was way better," she said the second time she visited. "This house doesn't make any sense," she added. "You always said that you hated the apartment and that we should buy our own house," replied my wife. "We finally have our house. I thought you would be happy," added my wife. "Yes, buy a house, but not this one." "You know how beautiful my house is, the house you grew up in," she said, looking at me. "You chose the wrong wife, and now the wrong house," said my mother. "Stop this nonsense. I'm done letting you talk down to my wife. You don't like the house? Leave," I shouted. "Why do you hate me so much?" my wife asked, crying. "I like nice and beautiful things, but apparently you don't have any of those," replied my mother with the most annoying facial expression. "Also, you cannot kick me out. I am your mother," she added. "That's rich, Mother. How about you keep your opinion to yourself? I would really appreciate it if you stop bothering anymore," I replied. "I want to talk something to your wife. I think she would understand better," my mother said out of nowhere. My mother said out of nowhere, "What?" "No," I replied. "You talk to me." I added, "It's fine," my wife said. So I went outside on the porch and waited. They talked for what it seemed like an eternity. But after another few minutes, my wife opened the door and told me to go inside. "Your mom wants to talk about something with both of us," said my wife. "She told me first because she knew how you'd react," she added. I took a seat on the couch and tried to prepare for the worst, but it was worse than expected. "I was thinking that you should give this house to your younger brother, and you could move back to the apartment," she said. "What?" I asked, laughing. "His girlfriend is pregnant, he's broke, and he doesn't want to live with me anymore. He wants a place for him and the future mother of his child. You are his brother, and you should help him," my mother said. "No way," I replied. "I cannot believe that you're saying this." I added, "Why can't he keep staying with you?" asked my wife. "Why impregnate the woman if he knew he had nowhere else to live?" she added. "Because he's not my responsibility anymore. Plus, I don't want to hear a baby's cries every day," she said. "And God gave them that baby. It wasn't his choice," she added. "Mom, you know that babies must be made, right? God doesn't just plant them in your uterus," I shouted. "I understand the situation is not nice, I really do. But this is our house. We worked hard to buy it." We sold the apartment, and we spent all our money on the house. How can I give it to him for free, I asked, angrier than ever. Out of anger, my mother started hitting her head on the table, punching the table, and screaming. She started punching herself until she was looking like someone had just beaten her. My wife was crying, and I was shocked, almost laughing in disbelief. My mother started crying and called the police. "Please come quick. My son and daughter-in-law are hitting me," she said on the phone. The police came and saw her all beaten up. My wife and I were trying to talk to her, understand what she was trying to do, but she was kicking and hitting us. "She hit herself, officer. At first she started hitting her head on the table, and then she just straight up started punching herself," I told a policeman. "It's true," said my wife, crying. "We told her something she didn't like, and that's how she apparently reacts," added my wife. "She hit her head on the table and punched herself just because you fought and then called the police and blamed everything on you?" asked the policeman. "Yes, that's exactly what happened." "She's crazy," I shouted. After this whole incident, I told my mom that she was no longer welcomed into our house. But little did we know about what she was about to do a week after the event when we went for a little vacation. When we left, we noticed that the main house key was missing, but we thought we had lost it around the house, so we took the spare key. 5 days later, when we came back home, my mother, brother, and his girlfriend were all there. My wife and I saw them through the windows dancing around the living room. I knocked at the door and waited for someone to open. My brother opened the door, hugged me, and smiled. "I didn't know you were coming," he said. "Thank you both for this," he added. "For what?" I asked angrily. "For the house. Mom told me you were giving it to me," he said. When I heard what he said, I barged inside and I started screaming. "Are you insane, Mother? Stealing the key and moving into our house? Are you not ashamed of yourself?" I shouted. "Get out," I added. She grabbed her phone and called the police again. They came to the door, and as soon as they saw my mother, they both laughed. I told them everything and even showed them video from the security cameras. I managed to get her arrested and to obtain a restraining order. I never saw her again after that day, and I never want to see her again. The only good thing that came out of it was now my brother had the house to himself, with Mother in jail. The last story is titled Something Fishy. I grew up with a crappy dad. I won't go too deep into it, but suffice to say, it's taken a lot of time and therapy to get past. I was really a sensitive kid, and he was particularly skilled at making me feel overwhelmed and invalid. One particular week, he had taken things way too far, and I was at wit's end with his crap. He had just gotten a brand new fancy car, one of those high-end Audis with all the bells and whistles. This thing was his pride and joy. My sister and I weren't allowed to eat or drink in the car, and he was pedantic about shoes being absolutely clean before getting in the car. The only dirty thing allowed in the car was his filthy sports gear that he never washed, which permanently lived in the boot. Anything like towels from the beach, fishing gear, or slightly dirty shoes had to be cleaned first or transported in the dedicated fishing truck. The sports gear stank to high heaven, and I never understood why it was an exception. He was also using this anti-smoking concoction made with garlic, and the smell seeped out of every pore of his body. So choosing where to sit in the car was a Russian roulette of olfactory torture. At the start of this week, full of taking crap from him with no outlet for my frustration, he had come back from a fishing trip, and this made the wheels start turning in my head. The boot of his car had a panel on the top of the spare wheel and a panel next to the spare wheel for some tools. My dad was useless with tools of any kind, so I figured he would never look there, and thus the plan came to life. There was a chest freezer full of bait in the garage, and one weekend when I was home alone, I took my chance. I carefully pried open the small compartment under the spare wheel and nestled the frozen fish I had selected amongst the tools. I placed everything back exactly as I found it and went on with my weekend. Come Monday morning, his car had a light but distinct smell of fish. He didn't seem to notice, but I was satisfied that my plan was unfolding. That satisfaction was confirmed when my mom started complaining a couple of days later about the smell, telling him his sports gear was getting disgusting. Skip forward a week, and things were smelling ripe, and my sister and I had convinced my mom to drive us to school, so we didn't have to sit through half an hour of nausea every morning. My dad had finally removed his sports gear, and my parents were now at a loss as to where the rancid odor was coming from. After getting the car clean, the smell was still there, and tensions were beginning to rise. It came to a glorious climax when my dad had to go on a week-long work trip in the dreaded smelly car, and I got to spend the week deviously imagining the horror of a road trip in a car with the rotting corpse of a fish. By the time he came back, the smell was gone, and I never found out how he got rid of it. For all I know, there might still be a fish skeleton in that little compartment in the boot. It's been about a decade since I did this, and it still gives me great satisfaction to think about. I do wish I knew whether the fish was still there when he eventually sold the car. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.